Hey guys, happy Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about the just peacemaking theory. It's intended to be kind of a middle ground in terms of the Christian spectrum of thought on war and pacifism, and it's supposed to be something that we can all agree on. It's kind of how we're going to end this run of new information. This, if all goes well today, will be the last video of new information. Then we're going to start working on your response. I'm going to have you guys give me evidence of your journaling over the last week and a half. Remember, you've been doing these response questions, and I asked you to kind of keep them in one place so you can send me a picture. So uh, we'll have you making sure you're ready to send me those. And then there's going to be a pretty short response in writing that we'll have due next week. It'll be pretty straightforward. Strengths and weaknesses of pacifism, strengths and weaknesses of just war theory, and where you land, basically. Why you have chosen the stance that you have chosen, at least for this part of your life, right? This moment. Because the truth is, you're 17, you're 18 years old. Things are going to change over time for you. Things changed over time for me. And I don't think exactly the same way I did 10 years ago. And I'm glad of that. I would think if I had, still all the same opinions I did in high school, then I would have lacked growth, and I would not be, walking very steadily with the way of the Lord. I think that we all recognize that there's growth, and so you don't have to be too, you know, intent on just settling in on one position for life right now, but at least where's your thinking at. That's kind of what the paper will be dedicated towards, and it'll be less than a page. I think basically 3 paragraphs, if they're well written paragraphs. Yeah. So anyway, let's do just peacemaking theory today. There is another response. If you haven't been journaling, find a way to go back and do that, because it is something I'm going to be checking for and grading you on once you send those to me next week. So please make sure you head back and do that. In the meantime, let's jump into just peacemaking theory. It's actually the newest of these paradigms. You could say that it's only 3 or 4 decades old, as people have been really developing this just peacemaking theory. And it's intended to be a position that everyone can agree on. If you're a just war theorist, you would also say, well, I still think we should be doing these peacekeeping or making initiatives. And if you're a pacifist, you would also agree. And so the idea is this is the middle ground in a sense, but more than that, it's something that improves our positions. It pushes the pacifist to actually live up to their name. A pacifist who is simply avoiding the world of trouble, is pushed by the just peacemaking theory to be more proactive. It ought not to be passive. Pacifism ought to be proactive. It also pushes just war theorists to do more than simply justify war and more than simply even defeat evil, but actually do something to make sure that that moment is transformative and bring lasting peace through these tenets. Now, there's actually 10 of these total, but I'm only going to give you 8 of them just based on time, and some of them I would say overlap quite a bit. So we maybe don't need all 10 necessarily. But I want you to understand that this would be something that Christians would do, you might say privately, but more than that, they would push their governments to do and actually engage in themselves. So let's take a look. The first one here is support nonviolent direct action. When you're thinking of and dreaming of what this might mean, nonviolent direct action, think of maybe Martin Luther King Jr. Or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from the Civil Rights Movement. If you could think of their creativity and the way that they engaged in the issues in the world around them, that's the sort of thing we're talking about in terms of direct action. People you might think of as activists today, who are working in those ways. We looked at a guy named Shane Claiborne. Remember when we were talking about capital punishment? He would be someone who is working on nonviolent direct action. Now, you can see obviously that there has been an impact, whether that's Gandhi's impact in India or Dietrich Bonhoeffer's impact in Germany or Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. But I want you to understand that that impact is not just cultural. It's actually been political, often reaching or having very far-reaching impact. If you look at some of the revolutions in the 1980s, sometimes called the Velvet Revolutions, for their non-violent tenor, you can see real success stories in places like Poland and East Germany. Latin America, a little bit more tumultuous, but progress there. And maybe the crowning achievement is what happened in South Africa under the non-violent direct action of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Number 2, independent initiatives to reduce threat. Think of it this way, a nation that is taking the first step. Let's say we're talking about Israel or something like that, and we're talking about tension over a strip of land. And let's say Israel decides that they actually do want to really have healthy and positive negotiations with Palestine. And let's say what they actually do then is they take the initiative. Let's say they withdraw troops as a good faith effort. What we end up sort of seeing there constantly and consistently is that puts a sort of moral pressure and a positive trajectory to the conversations that will take place before they even begin. And so the Christian would seek to be the nation or party that initiates the peace process by creating opportunities for negotiations, by taking the initiative. This is, I think, in some ways related to number 3, cooperative conflict resolution. In this way, what we're talking about is as many nations as possible initiating peace processes, but also supporting them. The United States has played this role to some degree of success over the years. You can think of the Camp David Accords during Jimmy Carter's presidency, or some of the successful negotiations you see with Reagan and so forth and so on. And what we're looking for there is countries that are in a position of influence initiating the peace process and playing third-party roles and trying to bring peace to regions that are in desperate need of it. Christians in the private sector could do maybe a similar thing in taking initiatives to mediate between corporations or between the government and the people. Whatever the case may be, we could lean into those scenarios. Number 4, acknowledge responsibility for conflict and injustice, seek repentance and forgiveness. Obviously very biblical and obviously very vulnerable. The most, I think, beautiful example that I've seen of this is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In South Africa, for a long time, a century, there was what you call apartheid. It's basically segregation, but it was for the whole country. And there was a great deal of violence done by the white population towards the black population in South Africa. And one of the things that they were most concerned about when they finally broke down apartheid is, okay, how do we bring justice to all this pain and suffering that has taken place? And so they set up these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions where people could basically seek forgiveness. They could confess the ways in which they had violated the rights of their neighbors. And the church took a leading role in this, especially Archbishop Desmond Tutu, an Anglican bishop in South Africa. And it had these really beautiful results, the kind of thing that I think Jesus was dreaming of when he taught on the Sermon on the Mount. Number 5, promote democracy, human rights, and religious liberty. Basically, what we want to say is we want to make it so that the world has less reason for violence. Promoting democracy and human rights and religious liberty is obviously very difficult work, but we can see the fruits of it. In the entire 20th century, no democracies fought a war against one another, and that's a very violent century. Actually, more people die a violent death in the 20th century than in all other centuries combined. So it is remarkable to think that if we could create a context where human rights were being respected and democracy was leveraged and there was religious liberty, you could create a context for peace. Number 6, foster just and sustainable economic development. This is one where I think the United States and other really highly developed nations will have to swallow a pretty bitter pill, which is to say we have to realize that in some ways we are rich because other people are poor. Meaning some of the ways that we have created our vast wealth, and that's not to say there isn't poverty in the United States and elsewhere, but some of the ways that we've created vast wealth is actually by taking advantage of the underdeveloped world or the developing world. And what we should demand as Christians from our corporations and from our government is something better than that, something more beautiful than that. Pursuing trade deals that are positive for both sides, economic justice for the world, not just economic prosperity for the United States. Number 7, strengthen the United Nations and international governing bodies. We saw the failure of the international governing bodies in the World War I era as it was developing out of World War I and towards World War II. But it is true to say that out of World War II, as the United Nations was more strongly organized and prepared to enter into these difficult spaces, the United Nations and other international governing bodies have made a difference in reducing the threat of war before it develops, actually. Last one, another one that would definitely take some vulnerability and some real leadership on the part of leading nations. That would be to reduce offensive weapons and weapons trade. Another thing that was dreamed of actually right out of World War I, and a thing that has been dreamed of even by the United States when in relationship to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, there's weapons treaties that were signed. SALT I and SALT II had a little bit of a bumpy ending for SALT II, but there have been moments where the United States has led in this way, and I would love to see that happen again. Instead of the rhetoric of continuing to advance offensive weapons and weapons trade, which has in many instances caused real trouble, what if we took the initiative? What if we took the lead in bringing nations together in agreements to reduce those weapons trade and the development of those weapons? So, like I said, this is something that the just war theorists would say, yes, we should be doing those things, and then when all else fails, we may have to go to war. And the pacifists would say we should be doing these things constantly so that we can transform our world in a way that war can't. Whatever your position might be, this is something we can all agree on. Please be working on your journals. And like I said, early next week, I'm going to have you send those to me. I know you might get behind a day or two here and there, so just play a little catch up here and get those together. Get them ready to send to me. It can be a picture. I don't care if you're handwriting them. You can send me a picture I can zoom in on, or it can be a file that you attach to the assignment that I'm going to make. But I just want to see this. I want to see that you're tracking, and eventually want to start to get a little bit more interactive here and start to see what your thinking is. I hope you're doing well. I hope this sunny Wednesday here, as the sun breaks in the afternoon, will be good for you. I'm looking forward to it myself. Hope to see you soon. Bye.